On this episode of the show, I have with me Nikola Borisov. He is CEO and co-founder at Deep Infra. We're going to be talking about, AI inference models, and we're going to be talking about how quickly things have been evolving, whether you should respond, and should you wait to respond? I mean, these are all questions that every leader in the market has to deal with. And we're going to be talking about how actually factor the changes that we've seen from DeepSeek. And we're going to talk about some of the hardware side. I normally don't talk about the hardware side, but Nikola has some expertise in that side as well. And what was science fiction a few years ago is coming true. And to lead in this space, you've got to operate maybe slightly differently. So we're going to get all those different perspectives from Nikola. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Before we start, can you tell everyone what Deep Infra does?
Sure. Deep Infra is an AI inference cloud. We help companies get access to the top open source AI models in a very simple and affordable way.
Okay. All right. I love it. It's a good space to be in. I guess, let's talk about the high level of things, right? And maybe actually I'm going to ask you, maybe what would be my last question earlier. So we have seen in what seemed to be the last 2 years, 36 months, somewhere in that range, things moving at a rapid pace, right? All the things we saw Hollywood glorify, 20, 30 years ago, machines talking to us, answering us. We're seeing it. Obviously, we're still away from, the Jetsons of flying cars and all those things, but we're seeing progress. When you're looking at the world and where it has shifted in such a fast time and what you're seeing as the art of the possible, where are we in that maturity curve? And the reason I ask is it has come really far, I guess, from a consumer perspective. I know research has been going on for decades, so but from what we're seeing now, it looks like it's coming along really fast.
It's definitely very fast moving. Like just about 3 years ago when we were getting started, ChatGPT was not out, but the GPT-3 models was there. And I think on the open source side, we saw Stable Diffusion really kind of open up the gates of what an open source model could do. And so in my mind, we've gone pretty far in terms of the adoption of how much we all use AI in our daily basis, but I still think we're probably less than 10% in the sense of how much we would be using AI just like 3-4 years from now. As you've seen, there's massive investments in the infrastructure needed to do all this amount of inference. And so, honestly, like 3 years ago, it's hard to imagine like the amount of adoption we had today, but I think it's also true that 3 years from now, we'll have even more adoption on all of these different products.
Absolutely. I guess as you're kind of looking at how quickly models are being developed, being released, I guess within your world, it's exciting. That's first of all. It's got to be super exciting if you're in it. But also, as a founder who, lives and breathes with those models, how does the speed of innovation affect your business from your startup from that perspective?
So, one thing when we first started the company about 3 years ago, we kind of bet on there will be a lot of open source models. If it could have gone a different way, maybe it's possible that OpenAI could have taken all of the market and there would be no competitors and no one could really replicate the quality of their models. But, thankfully for us, and I think just in general for everyone, there's been a very good stream of nice open source models for us to run, as well as, there's been a good development in the closed source models for sure. It is not easy at all to keep up with all the changes in models coming out. I always feel like we don't have enough staff to really bring all the models coming out to production. But you don't really have to have all of them either. You just have to kind of pay attention and see which ones are the most kind of consequential ones. And like anything else, I think speed or velocity is a key. Like you want to bring something up very quickly to our platform and let companies start building with that model. And if we see more traction, then we invest more time in improving that model and making it more and more production ready, stable, efficient, and so on. So it's an exciting time. And, some of these releases have been kind of pretty funny. Like I have this story, like maybe about 2 years ago when Mistral released their first mixture of expert models, they just basically they tweeted a link to a torrent file. And they didn't explain at all like what's inside. And so it was kind of like a scavenger hunt to really even make their model run. I think this is all kind of great that there is so much innovation and companies can kind of make name for themselves by releasing a great open source model. I think the DeepSeek folks kind of showed that, and they built an excellent model. And I think a lot of the stuff they did is kind of becoming part of future models trained by a lot of other labs. And it's kind of nice that we kind of all learn from each other. Like, when something cool happens in one model, then a lot of people try to kind of make that new innovation into the new things that they're building.
Do you think that and that's an interesting perspective, that competitive spirit, the competition, the driving progress of innovation, where do models go? I mean, it seems they're all pushing each other. They all release, features. Maybe we could argue one's better than the other. We can, there's nuances of that. You probably understand that much better than I do. But when we think about these models developing, how much differentiation will we see from an end user perspective? And I mean, end user in this case, let's actually talk about the startups that are building off of these models and building products and services. But from that perspective, is there a point at which, the choice of which model you work with or which model you should, keep up with, will those diminish, or will there always be some minor key advantages and you need to be aware of those?
I think there would always be like these new models coming out that are better than the previous generation ones, and using them would kind of give you this boost in productivity. Like if you're writing code, like, you'll get it right 10% more of the time. It's still meaningful because that 10% you don't get it right, you spend like a lot of effort and time trying to fix it. So I'm pretty positive for the whole space, meaning I think people building nice models will have a lot of business, and, companies building products with AI models that are kind of first in the market and have a useful tool will kind of have good times. I don't think, just because we all use the same models underneath and you can try to kind of build a similar thing doesn't mean that, the first movers don't have like the reputation, the brand. And generally, like, if something is nice and useful, you just kind of use it and more people build around it.
I guess, and maybe this is a little off topic, but when you mentioned first mover, let's use Amazon as a original bookseller model. Like we can go back. There was a lot of booksellers at the time. Like they were not just, there's a bunch of them. You can go back and Google them and there'll be a list of them. Amazon obviously wins that through innovation. The end product is clear, and the consumer drove that choice. When it comes to these models, right, and there are some that have first mover advantage. It's clear. People turn to them more from a consumer perspective. I'm sure most people, if you ask them what tool they use, it'll be ChatGPT. I think it's fairly easy to assume that's the number one, a model most consumers use. But I think it's a little bit different than first mover with, let's say, where Amazon ended up, because in Amazon's case, the end user can see and understand the service differences. It can tangibly understand that. These models are very hard to understand. I mean, you need a PhD to be able to read through some of the documentation, and relying on the responses, to most people, they seem fine. But when you think about first mover advantage, I feel it's a little bit different when we look at these products and consumers, because it seems like it's more black box. And the more somebody, let's say, uses one over the other and uses said mainstream adoption, I don't know if we might be using the optimal or best models, because it's become a verb, right? I think I heard high schoolers refer to ChatGPT as chat. They're like, I'm going to use chat. It's become a verb. What do you do? I'm going to go ask chat. So it's got a name. It's got a verb. No one says, I'm going to go use Claude yet. I'm going to Claude it, or whatever that term will be. So from a layman's perspective, what are your thoughts on, I mean, because you mentioned first mover advantage. I think that's really important. But in this case, will the consumer know if first mover was actually the best choice?
It's hard to know, but I personally feel that even though the tool might look like a black box, as long as it brings you value and like stuff that was hard to do before, now you can easily do with it, then you kind of keep using the tool. And, anecdotally, one of my friends recently asked ChatGPT to design like his AC and heating system for his house. And so I didn't think about this being like a use case for ChatGPT, but in general, it's able to do all these very different things. Now, I don't know, like how defensible ChatGPT is. Like, there's a lot of other pretty good models, and you can build like the same kind of interface with not too much effort. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I think like stuff in the past, there's like a brand, and I think they also get a lot of training data out of it. So that kind of helps.
Absolutely.
I'm just excited overall. Like, I think there's, ChatGPT is just like, I think a small portion of the whole thing that will happen. Like, we'll end up using AI for a lot of other tasks, not necessarily directly.
So obviously, pulling us back on track of the podcast episode, and obviously you guys have a very unique product, and sitting on top of an infrastructure, giving people the option to use these different models, giving them a low cost way of having deployable, ready production infrastructure. You mentioned something that I haven't really, no one's actually talked about on a podcast to date, and it was the hardware side, right? And then you mentioned, obviously the cards, the resale value, the cost, the marketplace. I was going to ask you to talk to us a little bit about that in context of what you were thinking about.
Sounds great. So maybe at first was going to start from the top, like, there's all these great open source models being released. And when stuff is open source, sometimes people think like, great, then you just like use it, right? But basically DeepSeek is this vast, large, complex model. And if you're a startup and you want to build something with it, it's best to use like an infrastructure partner like Deep Infra to help essentially get access to this model via our infrastructure. So it's kind of prohibitively expensive for a small startup to rent or even buy like the hardware needed to run the model. but we can essentially share the infrastructure between many, many different companies by hosting the model on our cards and then allowing a ton of different companies to use the model as little as they please. In some sense, we're like fractionalizing the model. And that is why I think it makes a lot of sense for people wanting to build something to use like the models as an API rather than trying to run them themselves. We try to build this very vertically integrated service where, we go out and go all the way down to the data center space, and we take data center space and we procure the machines, the hardware, ourselves, and we try to build an inference cloud that is basically very specialized for doing just inference. We always kind of think about like, if we wanted to do inference, like what would we do like differently, all the way from the machines we buy to the data centers where we put it in, to like the way we run the model and the way we organize the models and monitor them. So that's kind of what I spend most of my time thinking about, how to run the models more efficiently. And by efficiently, we mostly focus on it's really like a factory. Like I think Jensen is not far off. Like we essentially are manufacturing tokens for each model. And I think the key thing about a factory is how many you can do in an hour, right? So we're more focused on producing a lot of tokens per hour, but for all users instead of one individual user. So it's less about like getting a very fast model sometimes, like for each user to see like very many tokens, but it's more about the overall amount of tokens you can do for all users. That's kind of the overall part here.
Absolutely. And I guess when we were talking about how it is slightly different to work in this space, right? When you are dealing with the factor of hardware innovation, model innovation, I mean, you have two different dynamics working hand in hand. Sometimes they're out of sync, sometimes they are in sync. As a leader, what do you have to operate differently? I guess what are some of the things that have to, are top of mind for you, as a CEO?
Yeah. I think one interesting thing that is happening is that a lot of people think of the inference as kind of like secondary to the training of the models. But I actually think that this is going to be more important. Being more efficient at inference is going to be way more important than being very efficient at training. And so for that reason, I think it's important to utilize like the latest and greatest generation of hardware to do like the optimal serving of a lot of these models. We've invested heavily in our NVIDIA B200 chips, and we have a lot of them online that we use to host a lot of our models. And then from inference perspective, you also have to think about like the right form factor for inference. So I'll give you an example. We mostly stayed with air-cooled servers because I think for training, having liquid cooled is important since you can pack a lot of compute in very short footprint, small footprint of space, which is kind of important for training. But for inference, I don't think that's as important at all. And so just there's a lower cost per card if you go with air-cooled solutions. But honestly, like we spend most of our time on kind of software optimizations of how to run the models. And there's like 20 different things, 20 different techniques, that are all slightly different for every different model, and they don't all, like, you can't get all of them to work at the same time. So you basically have to pick some combination of them, test, and then maybe change that. And the interesting thing is it's very customer related, meaning for one particular customer and their requests, you can end up building a more optimized solution for just their traffic. The best example I have is, like, if someone, like, if say Gap gives a very large order for a particular type of cloth, then the clothing factory can really optimize how they produce this thing for that buyer.
I definitely think that's actually a great analogy. And while you were mentioning that, I wrote down a note to kind of ask you one final maybe question. You've seen the innovation in the space. It's constantly evolving. Your business model is built on those, and you actually told us early on that you can't go chasing every model update. You got to see what's being used. You got to see adoption. I mean, you've got to be very, very careful with those decisions as well. If you were to kind of look back, the last 24 months of what you've seen, the last 36 months unfold, is there anything in hindsight that you look at and you wonder you would have thought differently about, or you would look back and go, okay, I didn't see that coming. That was a bit of a shift in terms of how you might have been thinking in general?
It's hard to say. When the first mixture of expert model came out, I thought, like, after that, surely all the models will be mixture of experts. But I think Meta launched Llama 3 models, and they were all dense models, and they were all very, very good and trained on a ton of data. But I think it was more of just like Meta had prepared and already kind of worked and trained them in that dense model. I think it does turn out that mixture of expert models have a bunch of advantages, and I think we'll see more of that in the future. One thing I kind of probably didn't have enough time and missed a little bit is, people got really excited about DeepSeek V3, but they actually had a very nice V2 model, which had a lot of the cool optimizations that V3 had. It was just slightly smaller. But it was all so different to run, and actually no one really in our industry invested as much time in hosting that model. The only people actually hosting it used to be the DeepSeek folks themselves. So I feel like this was one of these models that it was on my radar. I wanted to dedicate some time and get it running for us, but just didn't get enough time to get to it until the V3 version came out, and that was kind of a massive model, clearly great benchmarks. And so then I think everybody kind of woke up to, I think, the cool architecture changes that have been happening around this space.
Absolutely. Well, I think obviously we're very early days as we spoke, Nikola, and I'm sure there's a lot of changes and innovation to come. If somebody wants to learn a little bit more, ask you a follow-up question, what's a good way of connecting with you?
I probably answer email the most. You can check our website or find me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to just chat with other people in the industry building stuff. I like learning from people. It doesn't have to be always, us trying to sell something or I just love talking to people and seeing what they are seeing. And that sometimes gives me ideas about what we should be looking into and building for people.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to coming on and sharing with us. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amir. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I mean, we covered a lot of ground talking about, where, the LLMs sit, the models sit, and we even talked a little bit about the effect of hardware, DeepSeek. I think Nikola also talked to us about being a leader in the space and kind of what he's had to do to navigate this fast-moving market. And I think it'd be a great episode. If someone out there is interested in this, share it with them. So I think it would be great to kind of do that. And also subscribe. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.